You tell yourself you're a free thinker, yet you've defended ideas you don't believe in more times this month than you can count. You've nodded along to opinions that made your stomach turn. You've smiled at people whose values contradict everything you claim to stand for. And here's what keeps you up at night if you're honest with yourself. You knew exactly what you were doing every single time. This isn't weakness. This isn't social anxiety. This is cognitive dissonance. And it's the most elegant compliance mechanism ever discovered. You're not being controlled by force. You're being controlled by the unbearable weight of your own contradictions. The term cognitive dissonance was coined by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957, but humans have been its prisoners for millennia. It's the mental discomfort you feel when holding two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, or when your actions violate your stated values. Your brain despises this tension the way your body despises physical pain. And just like pain, your mind will do almost anything to make it stop. But here's where it gets dark. The easiest way to eliminate cognitive dissonance isn't to change your behavior. It's to change what you believe. Your mind would rather rewrite your entire moral framework than admit you acted against your principles. This is why you're so easy to control. I think about the last time you stayed silent when someone said something you found repulsive. Maybe it was at work, maybe it was at a family dinner, maybe it was in a group chat. You had a choice in that moment: speak up and face social friction, or stay quiet and maintain your place in the hierarchy. You stayed quiet. Now your brain faces a problem. You believe you're principled. You believe you stand for something, but your actions just proved otherwise. Oh, way, it's not worth causing drama. Pick way, it's not worth causing drama. Pick your battles. You're being strategic, not cowardly. Within seconds, you've reconstructed reality itself to avoid admitting you compromised. This process happens so fast, you don't even notice it. Festinger's original research involved cult members who believed the world would end on a specific date. When the date passed and nothing happened, you'd expect them to abandon their beliefs. Instead, most doubled down. They claimed their faith had saved the world. They recruited more aggressively than ever before. Their commitment intensified after being proven wrong because admitting they'd wasted years on a delusion was psychologically unbearable. Rewriting reality was easier than accepting they'd been fools. You do this too, every single day. You just call it rationalization, justification, or seeing the bigger picture. The social implications of this are staggering. Every authoritarian regime in history has understood cognitive dissonance better than most psychologists. They don't need to make you believe in the system. They just need to make you participate. Once you've participated, your own mind becomes the enforcement mechanism. Consider Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments from 1961. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to learners who answered questions incorrectly. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They believed they were causing genuine pain. 65% continued to the maximum voltage, even when the learner screamed and begged them to stop. But here's what most people miss about that study. The subjects were in psychological agony. They sweated, and they trembled. They argued with the experimenter, but they kept pressing the button. And afterward, when interviewed, most justified their actions. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were just following orders. The experimenter was responsible. They had no choice. Their minds rebuilt the entire moral architecture of the situation to avoid accepting what they'd become. You've done a smaller version of this. Maybe you've participated in workplace practices you found unethical because you needed the job. Maybe you've laughed at jokes that disgusted you because everyone else was laughing. Maybe you've enforced rules you privately thought were cruel because they came from above. And afterward, you didn't see yourself as complicit. You saw yourself as practical, realistic, playing the game. Your cognitive dissonance didn't break you. It reformed you. Oh, it reshaped your values to match your behavior instead of the other way around. This is how good people become instruments of systems they claim to oppose. The mechanism is even more insidious in social hierarchies. When you invest time, energy, or dignity into a group, leaving becomes psychologically costly. The more you've sacrificed, the harder it is to admit those sacrifices were for nothing. This is why hazing works. Fraternities, military units, corporations, and cults all use the same principle: make the initiation painful, and members will value membership more. It sounds irrational, but it's perfectly logical from a cognitive dissonance perspective. If you endured humiliation to join a group, your mind faces two options: admit you degraded yourself for nothing, or decide the group must be extremely valuable to justify what you endured. Most people choose the latter. They don't just join the hierarchy, they defend it. They perpetuate it. They become its most loyal enforcers because their self-image depends on believing it was worth it. You see this in corporate culture constantly. Someone spends years climbing a ladder, sacrificing relationships, health, and personal values along the way. Then they reach a position where they can see the system is fundamentally hollow. Do they leave? Rarely. Instead, they become true believers. They preach company values with religious fervor. They dismiss critics as naive or lazy. They've invested too much to admit it was a waste. Their cognitive dissonance has turned them into missionaries for the very system that hollowed them out, and they'll do the same to the next generation because every person they convert validates their own choices retrospectively. This is how hierarchies perpetuate themselves without force. You police yourself, you police others, not because anyone threatened you, but because admitting you've been complicit is more painful than continuing to comply. The system doesn't need guards when every prisoner is terrified of recognizing they're in a prison. Your mind will construct elaborate philosophical frameworks to explain why the bars are actually there for your protection, why the small cell is actually cozy, why the warden is actually wise, anything to avoid the shattering realization that you could have left at any time but chose not to. A Festinger identified several ways people reduce cognitive dissonance. You can change your behavior to align with your beliefs. You can change your beliefs to align with your behavior, or you can add new beliefs that bridge the contradiction. That last one is the most common and the most dangerous. Someone who eats meat but loves animals doesn't stop eating meat or stop loving animals. They add a belief. Animals raised for food don't really suffer, or humans need meat to survive. Or it's natural and therefore moral. These bridge beliefs are rarely examined critically because they exist purely to resolve psychological tension. They're not conclusions drawn from evidence. They're patches over cognitive wounds, and once installed, they're defended as fiercely as any core value because removing them reopens the wound. You carry dozens of these patches right now. Beliefs you adopted not because they're true, but because they allow you to live with contradictions. You claim to value privacy but use services that harvest your data. You claim to oppose exploitation but buy products made in sweatshops. You claim to care about the future but live in ways that compromise it. Each contradiction could shatter your self-image as a good person, so your mind installs justifications. Everyone does it. Individual choices don't matter. The system is too big to fight. You're doing what you can. These aren't rationalized excuses you consciously constructed, and their emergency psychological architecture your brain built automatically to keep you functional, but they come at a cost. Every bridge belief makes you more compliant, more accepting, more willing to participate in things you know are wrong because you've already built the mental infrastructure to justify participation. Social media has weaponized this mechanism with surgical precision. You post something publicly, it gets challenged. Now you face dissonance. Admit you were wrong in front of your entire network, or defend a position you're not sure about. Most people double down. They don't just defend the original post. They research arguments to support it. They seek out information that confirms it. They dismiss contradicting evidence as biased. Within hours, a casually held opinion becomes a fortified position, not because new evidence emerged, but because public commitment made retreat psychologically unbearable. You've done this. You've watched yourself become more extreme in real time, not because you discovered truth, but because you posted before thinking and your ego couldn't afford the alternative. The platform knows this. It's designed to trigger public commitment, then let your cognitive dissonance do the radicalization work automatically. The political implications are catastrophic. When people publicly align with a party, candidate, or ideology, cognitive dissonance makes apostasy nearly impossible. Every scandal, contradiction, or broken promise creates psychological tension. The healthy response would be to update your position based on new information. But that requires admitting your previous judgment was wrong, which threatens your identity as someone who makes good judgments. So instead, you minimize, rationalize, and reinterpret. The scandal isn't that bad. The other side is worse. The ends justify the means. Politics is dirty by nature. Over time, you don't just tolerate behavior you once found unacceptable. You actively defend it. You attack people who point it out. Your tribe becomes your identity, and threats to the tribe become threats to your self-concept. You're no longer evaluating ideas. You're protecting your psychological investment. This is why political polarization doesn't respond to facts. Facts create dissonance, and dissonance must be eliminated at all costs. And even if the cost is reality itself. Relationships operate on the same principle. You invest years in someone. You introduce them to family. You build a life together. Then you notice things. Red flags you would have run from on a first date are now problems you manage, explain, minimize. You've told everyone this is the one. You've made sacrifices. You've turned down other options. Admitting the relationship is wrong means admitting you wasted years and missed opportunities. It means facing the judgment of everyone you told it was perfect. It means accepting that your judgment was catastrophically flawed. So instead, you adjust. You redefine what love means. You lower your standards and call it maturity. You confuse endurance with commitment. Your cognitive dissonance doesn't just keep you in the wrong relationship. It makes you evangelical about it. You give advice to others based on the justifications you created for yourself. You recruit others into your framework because every person who accepts your logic validates your choices. Misery doesn't just love company. It needs company to avoid recognizing itself as misery. The workplace is perhaps the most sophisticated dissonance factory ever created. You spend the majority of your waking life there. You derive your identity, your social circle, and your financial survival from it. When the organization does something unethical, you face an impossible choice. I resist and risk everything you've built, or comply and violate your principles. Most people comply. Then the dissonance kicks in. You weren't complicit. You were realistic. You have responsibilities. You're changing it from within. You're gathering information. The time isn't right. These phrases aren't cowardice. They're cognitive dissonance management, and the more you use them, the more your values reshape themselves around your behavior. Within months, and you're not someone compromising their principles temporarily. You're someone whose principles have been permanently recalibrated. The organization didn't break you. You broke yourself to eliminate the psychological pain of contradiction. And the most elegant part, you'll call this growth, maturity, learning how the world really works. The education system runs on this mechanism. Students are forced to comply with arbitrary rules for years. Sit still, ask permission, regurgitate information, compete with peers, accept authority without question. This creates massive dissonance for intelligent young people who can see the absurdity, but they need grades to progress, so they comply. And compliance creates psychological tension. The resolution? They begin to believe the system makes sense. They internalize the values they were forced to perform. By the time they graduate, they're not rebels who survived indoctrination. They're true believers who will impose the same system on the next generation. This is why educational reform fails. The graduates become teachers, administrators, and policymakers who unconsciously defend the system that shaped them because admitting it was harmful means admitting their own development was built on a broken foundation. Consumer culture exploits this ruthlessly. You buy something expensive. Immediately, you face dissonance. Did you waste money? Are you financially irresponsible? Is this thing actually worth what you paid? These questions are intolerable, so your mind goes to work. You research reviews that confirm it was a good purchase. You tell friends about it, seeking validation. You use it prominently to justify the expense. You become a brand advocate, not because the product is superior, but because you need to believe your choice was rational. Marketing departments know this. They don't just sell products. And they sell identity frameworks that reduce post-purchase dissonance. You didn't buy a phone. You joined an ecosystem. You didn't buy a car. You expressed your values. The more expensive the purchase, the more aggressive your mind works to justify it, and the more loyal you become to the brand. You'll defend it in arguments. You'll mock alternatives. You'll upgrade repeatedly, not because it's the best option, but because your self-image as someone who makes smart decisions depends on it being the best option. Even your memories aren't safe from this mechanism. Research shows that people systematically distort their recollections to reduce dissonance. You remember your choices as more justified than they were. You remember your past self as more consistent than they were. You remember events in ways that support your current identity. This isn't lying. It's automatic cognitive reconstruction. Your brain is literally rewriting your history to maintain psychological coherence. This means the story you tell about your life, the narrative of who you are and how you got here, is partially fiction designed to eliminate contradictions. The person you think you've been is an edited version constructed to make your current position feel inevitable and justified. You're not the author of this story. Your cognitive dissonance is. This has profound implications for social change. And every movement that challenges established hierarchies faces an army of people whose identity is invested in those hierarchies. These aren't necessarily bad people. They're people whose psychological architecture depends on the current system being legitimate. To accept that the system is unjust means accepting that their compliance was complicity, that their success was built on exploitation, that their sacrifices maintained something rotten. And this realization is so psychologically devastating that people will fight to the death to avoid it. They'll construct elaborate arguments. They'll attack reformers personally. They'll defend the indefensible, not because they're evil, but because their sanity depends on believing their life choices were justified. You cannot reason someone out of a position their mental health requires them to hold. Their cognitive dissonance will generate counter-arguments faster than you can present evidence. The most disturbing aspect is how this affects your perception of freedom. You believe you make autonomous choices. You believe your opinions are your own. You believe you act according to your values. But if your mind automatically restructures your beliefs to justify your behavior, and your behavior is largely dictated by social and economic pressure, then what exactly is choosing? You're not a free agent navigating the world according to principles. You're a dissonance reduction machine that generates the illusion of principled choice after the fact. Your reasons are excuses. Your values are rationalizations. Your identity is a story you tell to make your compliance feel like autonomy. This isn't freedom. It's the most sophisticated form of control ever devised. A system that makes you imprison yourself and call it liberty. So what do you do with this information? You're already feeling dissonance right now. And this script has challenged your self-image as someone who acts according to principles. You have options. You can dismiss this as cynical, nihilistic, or exaggerated. You can tell yourself you're different, more self-aware, less susceptible. You can agree intellectually while changing nothing behaviorally. All of these responses reduce dissonance, or you can sit with the discomfort. You can examine the last week of your life and identify every moment you reshaped your beliefs to match your behavior instead of the other way around. You can recognize the patterns. You can catch yourself mid-rationalization and ask what you're really protecting. This won't make you immune. Cognitive dissonance is a feature of human psychology, not a bug you can delete. But awareness creates a sliver of space between stimulus and response. In that space, actual choice becomes possible. Not easy, not comfortable, but possible. The question isn't whether you've been socially compliant through cognitive dissonance. You have. Everyone has. The question is whether you'll continue to let your mind edit reality to protect your ego, or whether you'll develop the rare and painful capacity to hold contradictions without collapsing into justification. Most people can't. Most people won't. But if you've watched this far, some part of you is willing to try.